Sometimes life is like this dark tunnel. You can't always see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Hey, USA, you wouldn't keep any secrets from me, right?
Yeah, we wouldn't keep secrets.
Then what are these bombs you dropped?
After World War II, Soviet and American relations tensed after the drop of both atomic bombs. The USSR felt that the US had betrayed them. The USSR favored a communist government, while the US was strongly democratic. These two governments did not mix and were always fighting to be the best. Eastern Europe had become an area of disagreement, and each nation wanted their influence to be more dominant. Before we continue, many of you may be asking what communism is. Well, let me explain. It's the year 1917, and this funny man just started a revolution in Russia. He makes a new government that has no social classes, and everyone is happy because they are paid the same. Right? This sucks. Okay, well, the living conditions aren't the best, but the government has to be great. Right? No. Why was I thrown in jail, sir?
You stopped clapping during Stalin's speech.
This sucks. Back to the Cold War. The USSR sent their army to help with the countries from the aftermath of World War II. The presence of the Soviet army in Eastern Europe ensured that a pro-Soviet communist government would eventually be established. An Iron Curtain had fallen over Eastern Europe, dividing East and West Europe and their beliefs, along with starting the Cold War era. The US came up with the theory of containment, which is where they are trying to contain or stop the spread of communism. Greece and Turkey were in danger of falling to communism, and the US had to do something. Truman responded with the Truman Doctrine. He requested $400 million in economic and military aid for the two nations, which he got. The Truman Doctrine succeeded, and neither nation fell to communism. Some historians quote the Truman Doctrine as the official start of the Cold War. Soon after, a European recovery plan known as the Marshall Plan was put in place, and as a result, none of the Western European nations fell to communism. Germany's recovery was crucial to the prosperity of Western Europe, but the Soviets still wanted Germany to pay. After the war, Berlin was split into two, and America's side was doing pretty good. The Berlin airlift was when Soviet troops blockaded West Berlin. In response, the US military flew over supplies to the people of West Berlin, and containment was once again successful. That will surely stop those stupid capitalists from getting into my beautiful cities.
Spare change, ma'am. Squidward.
How will you provide for your side, you will say? And that horrible noise coming from your side is just more reason why capitalism never works. That's just our support planes coming in. What? Soon, the Korean War ensued, while US forces controlled South Korea and Soviet troops controlled North Korea. Each nation wanted their side to succeed so that they could advance their ideologies. The North Koreans struck first, capturing almost all of South Korea. The United Nations scrambled to put an army in Korea. Soon, they made big advances, getting all the way to China. You're getting pretty close to China. Make sure you do not bring them into this war, okay? I will not bring China in the war. Do not worry.
12 seconds later.
China, open up the door. China soon entered the war, bringing much stress to President Truman. With support from China, the Soviets pushed back the UN forces back to where they originally stood. Truman ended up firing one of his greatest military leaders in the process, and many disagree with his decisions. Eisenhower takes office, and during his term, the Korean War ceasefire was signed in 1953. Americans became terrified of Soviet nuclear attack, Soviet spies in America, and the spread of communism. This led to the Red Scare. Americans built fallout shelters and schools practiced duck and cover drill in preparation of a nuclear attack. During this period, Joseph Stalin died and Nikita Khrushchev took his place. John F. Kennedy took office after Dwight, and his main involvement in the Cold War was the space race. The space race was when the US and the USSR competed in who could complete space tasks first. The Soviets won a few of the first milestones, such as creating the first satellite to orbit the Earth and sending the first man into space. Kennedy made a bold speech in which he declared that the US would make it their goal to have a man on the moon before the end of the decade. Later that year, Kennedy soon delivered on that promise. Soon, a man by the name of Fidel Castro takes over Cuba, and Kennedy is nervous that they are too close for comfort. Not long after Castro takes control, the Berlin Wall goes up in Germany, separating East and West Berlin, and destroying the economy of Berlin.
So we just installed over 100,000 kilometers of wall around Berlin. Have a good day.
The Berlin Wall was devastating, separating over 100,000 people, and many died trying to cross the Berlin Wall. Families wouldn't reunite until 1989, and many starved in the poor conditions of the Soviet Union. Many couldn't live with this, having over 100,000 escape attempts and multiple unique and interesting ways people came up with to get over the wall.
This is the neighborhood, and you are not welcome.
We are just trying to get back to our families.
Please, we have no money for food. Let us through.
To be here.
Remember Castro? Because he's about to make the closest we've ever been to world annihilation. The US decides that they need to invade Cuba and overthrow Castro with a plan they call the Bay of Pigs invasion. The Bay of Pigs invasion was where US trained rebels went to invade Cuba to stop the communist regime. Instead, they ended up actually getting caught and viciously defeated. Kennedy refused to use the US Air Force to aid in the invasion as a sign of neutrality and to show that the US had no part in the invasion. But the captured rebels revealed the US involvement, and Castro turned to his big brother, the USSR, for help. The USSR installed missiles in Cuba, and the US did not like that, considering the US is only 90 miles from Cuba. Kennedy ordered a naval blockade rather than an invasion of Cuba to dismantle the nukes, and on the 13-day standoff ensued. The world waited in anticipation of nuclear warfare. In the end, the US and USSR established a phone line between the two nations, and Kennedy agreed to move the missiles that he placed in Turkey, while the Soviets removed their missiles from Cuba. Not too long after the Cuban Missile Crisis, problems in Vietnam arose. Vietnam split themselves in two during the Geneva Accords, and this frightened the US. The US feared that Indochina would fall to communism. So Kennedy sent aid and advisors to help and make sure that containment was being applied. Not too long after Vietnam split, JFK was assassinated and Lyndon B. Johnson took over as president. Lyndon B. Johnson was the main president during the Vietnam War. After a supposed attack on U.S. Navy vessels, Lyndon B. Johnson asked Congress for ultimate power to conduct military operations without Congress' declaration of war, and Congress agrees. This becomes known as the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. Lyndon B. Johnson escalates the war by sending U.S. troops to help South Vietnam and ordering a bombing campaign against North Vietnam. In addition, he uses deforestation chemicals such as Agent Orange and napalm to help the U.S. forces see through the dense Vietnam terrain. But it ended up causing severe physical problems to the Vietnamese people, along with ruining Vietnam's landscape. Lyndon B. Johnson thought that it was the United States' responsibility to not let history repeat itself and to make sure communism does not spread. Since North Vietnam was communism, many events happened, all factors in Johnson's removal from the next presidential election. First, a surprise attack on South Vietnam and the U.S. forces known as the Tet Offensive, which showed that the U.S. was not doing as well as they told the public. Next, the My Lai incident, where U.S. troops massacred 500 plus citizens by accident, thinking that they were the enemy. Riots and protests rise, and Johnson becomes very unpopular, leading to his demise. And the fall of South Vietnam. Ronald Reagan's presidency began with advancing American influence during the Cold War. He came up with a policy of peace through strength, where the U.S. had a budget of $1.5 million on building up the U.S. defense and military. Reagan also came up with the Reagan Doctrine, where the US would send money to small groups wanting to overthrow their communist oppressors. In addition to sending aid, Reagan started other projects in order to advance the US defense. He started the Strategic Defense Initiative, also known as Star Wars, which was when the US used nuclear weapons in a defensive fashion, firing at incoming missiles aimed at the US. The USSR could not keep up with all the costs and still trailed behind the US. The Berlin Wall had still not yet been destroyed, and Reagan wanted it gone. "Tear down this wall" is a quote from him about the matter. The wall symbolized a divide between nations and political ideologies. After years of failed agricultural and industrial production, the Soviet economy declined. Reagan convinced Saudi Arabia to lower the price of oil, causing the USSR to lose money from its oil exports. Gorbachev, feeling the crash of the economy, begins new policies. Perestroika is the reconstruction of economy, and glasnost is allowed for political openness. The last president of the Cold War era was President George Bush. Gorbachev, despite his efforts, ends up being overthrown. In addition, the Berlin Wall, destroying the amnesty that was built in and by 1991. 15 communist nations within the USSR declared their independence, ending the Cold War at last.